So, back in March 2021, a financial earthquake hit Wall Street, and almost nobody saw it coming. A super secretive investment firm, basically operating in the shadows, managed to lose a massive fortune and left some of the world's biggest banks holding the bag for billions. This is the story of that $160 billion ghost. It all starts with this number, $20 billion. Just try to wrap your head around that. It's a truly colossal personal fortune, and it was built up over about a decade. And then, poof, it was gone. In just 48 hours, that entire $20 billion just vanished. We're talking about one of the fastest, most massive losses of personal wealth in history. So that's the big question we're going to dig into, right? How did this even happen? How does one guy build a ghost portfolio worth $160 billion? Totally invisible to regulators and even the very banks that were bankrolling him. The story is a wild ride through risk, secrecy, and just pure ambition. To really get this, we have to start with the man at the center of the storm, Bill Hwang, a truly brilliant but, let's say, controversial Wall Street veteran. Bill Hwang's resume was top tier. He was a Tiger Cub, which is a huge deal. It means he was a protege of the hedge fund legend Julian Robertson. He launched his own fund, Tiger Asia, and it was super successful. But then it all came crashing down. In 2012, he pleaded guilty to wire fraud. He was basically blacklisted. So he made this incredibly clever pivot. In 2013, he turned his whole operation into something called a family office and named it Archegos. And that one move, well, that was the key to everything that happened next. So how did that little switch let him come back bigger and way more secretive than ever before? Well, he used two really powerful tools that, together, acted like a financial invisibility cloak. Okay, first, there's the family office structure itself. You see, in the US, if you're a hedge fund managing money for other people, you are under a microscope. You got to register with the SEC, you have to disclose what you're doing. But a family office, which is supposed to just manage one family's money, is exempt from all that. No registration, no public disclosures. Hwang basically used this loophole to run a hedge fund the size of a giant, but with total, complete privacy. The second tool is something called a total return swap, or TRS. The easiest way to think about it is like this. Instead of buying a stock, you're renting its performance from a bank. You get all the profit if the stock goes up, and you're on the hook for all the losses if it goes down. But, and this is the magic trick, your name never shows up as the owner. The bank owns it. You're just a ghost pulling the strings. So here's the deal in practice. Archegos would pay a bank, like Credit Suisse, a small interest rate. And in return, Archegos got all the good stuff from owning a stock. The gains, the dividends, all without anyone knowing. On paper, the bank was the legal owner, which meant the bank was taking on the massive risk that Archegos might not be able to pay up if the stock tanked. This is how he secretly controlled billions and billions of dollars in stock. All right, so with the privacy of a family office and the invisibility of these swaps, Hwang was all set to place his bet. And wow, was it a big one. Probably one of the most concentrated, highly leveraged bets Wall Street has ever seen. This was not your typical diversified portfolio. Nope. Hwang went all in on just a handful of stocks, maybe 8 to 10 total. He used huge amounts of borrowed money, leverage, to turn his $20 billion into $160 billion of exposure. But here's the really genius and deceptive part of the plan. He spread these bets across a bunch of different banks, so each bank only saw its little piece of the pie. None of them had any idea that he was building the exact same dangerously wobbly tower of debt with all of their biggest competitors at the same time. I mean, the risk here was just off the charts. By the end of 2020, just 4 stocks made up half of Archegos' entire market value. With that kind of concentration, one bad day for one single company could trigger a complete catastrophe for the whole portfolio. It was a textbook house of cards. So you have to be asking, why on earth did the banks let him get away with this? Well, this quote, which comes from the official investigation into Credit Suisse, pretty much says it all. The banks were making so much money in fees from Hwang, we're talking millions a year from just one bank, that they just kept ignoring all the red flags. They were more afraid of losing his business than they were of the catastrophic risk he was building right under their noses. And that risk? Well, it was about to become a reality. In that last week of March 2021, the house of cards didn't just wobble, it completely imploded, with a speed that was just breathtaking. It all kicked off on Monday, March 22nd. One of his favorite stocks, Viacom CBS, dropped a bit after some company news. That one drop was enough to trigger margin calls from the banks. By Wednesday, another key stock fell hard, and Archegos had to admit it was in serious trouble. By Thursday, the margin calls were up to almost $3 billion, and Hong had to tell them the money's gone. Friday morning, the default notices went out, and the panic officially began. What happened next was a classic case of what's called a prisoner's dilemma, straight out of a game theory textbook. All the banks had a choice. They could cooperate, unwind all these trades slowly and try to minimize the damage to the market, or they could defect, sell everything immediately to save themselves and let everyone else deal with the consequences. And here's what they chose. Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley, they defected big time. They immediately dumped billions of dollars of stock onto the market that Friday to get out first. Meanwhile, Credit Suisse and Nomura hesitated. They were hoping everyone would just work together for an orderly sale over the weekend. But by then it was way too late. The first movers had already crashed the stock prices, leaving the other banks holding assets that were now practically worthless. And just like that, the fire sale was over. But now came the reckoning. The damage was absolutely staggering, and it led to criminal charges and a massive push to rewrite the rules of the game. The consequences of that prisoner's dilemma could not have been more clear. Credit Suisse, the bank that waited, they lost a jaw-dropping $5.5 billion. Nomura lost almost $3 billion. And the banks that sold first, Morgan Stanley lost less than $1 billion, and Goldman Sachs got out with barely a scratch. It just goes to show you, in a fire sale, speed is everything. And what about Bill Huang, the man behind the Ghost portfolio? Well, for his role in the whole mess, he was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for market manipulation and fraud. The man who built the invisible empire was finally held accountable. As you can imagine, this whole thing sent shockwaves through the regulatory world. The SEC has new rules now that force people to disclose these big swap positions. There's a big push to close that family office loophole that started it all, and there are new rules designed to stop this kind of hidden leverage from ever building up in the dark again. The system is literally being rewired to prevent another Archegos. Even Credit Suisse got hit with a nearly $400 million fine for its failures before it eventually collapsed and was bought by UBS. So the takeaway here is pretty clear. A toxic mix of secrecy and extreme leverage created a ticking time bomb right in the heart of the financial system. Yeah, the new rules are designed to find these bombs before they go off, but it leaves you with one big question. In a game where billions are on the line for whoever can find the next loophole, is it only a matter of time before we meet the next ghost?